Hi all, this lecture will cover the epilogue of Gibson's Ethics and Business and Introduction. We've reached the end. So, this chapter starts by going over the details of one of the more recent large, very public failings of Enron and WorldCom, and the factors that led up to those, the fallout that comes after them. But there are many failures of big corporations, not just Enron and WorldCom, but Tyco, Global Crossing, Lucent, Barings Bank, Wells Fargo, Bear Stearns, Chase, Citibank, and Lehman Brothers. And if you read about them individually, they read like morality. Each one reads like a morality tale, but they're far too frequent to allow us to think that they're caused merely by the immorality of a handful of individuals. Rather, the frequency of them, the seeming increasing frequency of them, should lead us to believe that larger forces are at work. So what larger forces have we covered in the text that may be at play here? Well, we've talked about corporate culture and how that can affect the actions of businesses. And in these cases, we see breakdowns in the corporate culture. We see corporate culture not guided by ethical principles, not oriented towards ethical principles. We also see few checks and balances. So not just checks and balances from and regulations from the outside, but few checks and balances from the inside. So not many restrictions placed on the way these businesses operate by the government. And also when other firms are in the place to audit and check on big corporations, often they're also negligent, or sometimes they're working in tandem with the corporation that they're supposed to be checking on. There's also the effect of the material incentives of capitalism. So for individuals, it incentivizes greed. For corporations, it incentivizes expansion. So what's to be done here? The author proposes that we need to focus on enduring values and systematic moral thought as correctives. Now, these are exactly the sorts of things that philosophers love to focus on. That's our domain when we talk about questions that keep reoccurring, values that we need to prop up or knock down, and trying to systematize those insights. That's exactly the business of philosophy. That's exactly why ethics is taught in philosophy, and now business ethics is also taught under the umbrella of philosophy. So that's why this section is called Revalidating Philosophy. The author in this last chapter is building a case that philosophy can help fix some of these problems. We'll see what you think by the end of this lecture. So, to reiterate, market forces under capitalism pull individuals and corporations towards avarice and expansion. What we need, the author proposes, is to encourage individuals to develop internal reward structure for virtues and reconceptualize corporations as moral agents so they develop virtues as well. So they need to develop an internal reward structures. There's some talk in the chapter when new regulations are put in place. The question that many corporations ask is, how strict are the penalties if we violate the regulations, and where are the loopholes? And that's problematic. If you have any experience with little kids, you put a rule in place and immediately they start testing the boundaries. they start asking, well, what are the punishments? They don't ask, they just test what the punishments are if they don't comply, and what loopholes they can create to do what they want. And if the only forces that try to make them moral, try to shape them towards the common good, are external forces, then they'll very soon and very often stray. So we see that with the corporations there, where there was no internal reward structure for virtue, and the external forces were pulling them in the direction of immorality. So this is not just on business people and corporations, it's also on consumers as well. So consumers, the text highlights, should prioritize fair trade and union-made products in purchases. Why? Because then we show if market morality is, if businesses are taking signals from purchasing practices of consumers, then the signal we need to send to them is that we value good working conditions for producers and for workers. So we show that with our dollars. So ultimately, what the text is proposing here, we need a trinity of virtuous firms, virtuous employees at those firms, all the way to the top, to the CEOs, and virtuous consumers. And if we have that, then the book thinks we have a chance of counteracting the forces of the external forces that are pulling all of these things, the firms, the employees, and the consumers, pulling them towards immorality, to selfishness, and a selfishness that does not lead to the common good. In the last chapter, we talked about the invisible hand, which some real pro-capitalists take on faith that, look, this leads to the common good. But so often we've seen, especially lately, that the influence of capitalism is corrupting, and we need to try, what the author is proposing here is that we need the help of firms, employees, and consumers to try to correct that. So why are market forces within capitalism pulling consumers towards immoral consumption? When you go to the store, if you're purchasing eggs, for example, you might notice different cartons with different labels, and the cheaper ones don't have those labels. So the cheaper ones won't be free range, they won't be organic, they won't be certified humane. And there's a premium put on, there's additional costs associated with better treatment of animals, better treatment of the employees who are working in those industries. So a dozen eggs, at the time I'm making this lecture, can cost between 50 cents for a dozen if you get the kind where animals are undergoing tremendous abuse and the people working in the industry are seeing tremendous abuse and facing psychological problems as a result. That's 50 cents a carton. And if you want the carton of eggs where the male chickens are still killed at birth, like they are with the cheaper ones, but they get to really roam around on pastures, engage in their natural behaviors, and they lay eggs and they're taken, but that's about it as far as the abuse that they see, maybe in transport. Well, that's going to cost $6 a carton. So the market forces make being a morally good consumer very expensive. So and that makes it disadvantageous for the consumer themselves to be morally good, to put this to pay more. I mean, if you're spending $6 a dozen on eggs, that's money that you could be spending elsewhere for your well-being or to help others. So it makes it difficult to be a virtuous consumer. However, one thing we need to note is that as consumers, we're also employees. So what goes around comes around, right? If we're buying those cheap products, we can expect others to be buying those cheap products, and that will make for worse working conditions for us because other people will be doing the same thing with the industry that we're working in. So we need to talk about what counts, what values we should be promoting, like the common good, like honesty, like beneficence, and we need partnership between these three parts of the business cycle, I guess. And why should we hope that this will work? The author cites big corporations, Nike and Denny's, as examples where, because of pressure from consumers and non-governmental organizations, they changed some of their practices. So Nike was charged of having sweatshops, employing sweatshop labor, and because of consumer pressure, they now built more into their corporate culture that they need to take the stakeholder instead of the shareholder view to their corporation. So they need to be more concerned with the well-being of their employees and their producers and their consumers, and take that as part of their mission. So that's a bright spot in this. And what we should be striving for in our own life, since the corrupting influence of external forces, which in part the mode of production, the capitalist mode of production burdens us with, we should strive against that for personal integrity. That's a unified morality in private and work life. All too often, we see people willing to cut corners at work. When they go home, they're stand-up people. And that is a product. The regularity with which we see that is a product of the mode of production that we engage in. So the quote from the text is, "Capitalism pushes us to segregate our work lives from other parts of our lives and to pursue external rewards such as pay and status. And companies are currently judged mainly in terms of their economic performance." But then we run into a problem. What the market forces of capitalism encourage us to take the attitude that we're serving our business. But that gets the relationship backwards. Business is created to serve human beings. So we should be the beneficiaries of business. We should be the beneficiaries of the economy. The economy and business is not a good in itself. It's not something that we should be sacrificing people for. It's something that should be making sacrifices for the well-being of human beings. So the market forces of capitalism encourage us to get that backwards, but we should try not to. We should remember that the intrinsic goods are the well-being of humans, the moral sense that humans have, and business is just a way of getting to those real enduring values. So the quote has a nice paragraph to rally us here. "The reason for tempering the effect of unchecked capitalism is that ultimately business should serve us, and it does that best when we guide its action in order to promote the common good. In business terms, for example, the urge for profit may tempt us to be less than fully honest or may discourage the company from giving back to the community. If we recognize these forces, though, we can counter them in various ways by employee activism, ethics hotlines, and ombudsman offices to allow greater transparency in reporting, as well as consumer awareness. We can also use the vehicles of political action to legislate for our interests and mobilize forces such as NGOs to pressure and remind businesses to balance their desire to maximize profit with their other chartered duties to stakeholders. So that sounds nice and optimistic. And if we want to preserve humanity, we certainly hope that it's the case. The last section of the text asks the question, if outsiders, so say alien civilization, were to come down and judge us on our activity here, what might they think? Well, there was an author, a French author, Alexis de Tocqueville, who came to the United States in the early 1800s, and he had some praise and warnings for us. So he had to say to us, as far as praise in democracies, nothing is more great or more brilliant than commerce. It attracts the attention of the public and fills the imagination of the multitude. All energetic passions are directed towards it. And we do see the wonders of production of the free market. Now, he said democracy there. We covered this already, that the way businesses are structured under capitalism is private control, not democratic control. So his use of the word democracy there we might quibble with. He was comparing democracy to prior modes of production. And the market produces wonders, right? I mean, here we are having this class, and we are miles apart, and you may be listening to this hours or days after I produce this lecture, right? And that's amazing. But he also had some warnings for us. So he says, I'm of the opinion, on the whole, that the manufacturing aristocracy, which is growing up under our eyes, so under the new capitalist mode of production, is one of the harshest that ever existed in the world. But at the same time, it is one of the most confined and least dangerous. Nevertheless, the friends of democracy should keep their eyes anxiously fixed in this direction, for if ever a permanent inequality of conditions and aristocracy again penetrates into the world, it may be predicted that this is the gate by which they will enter. And with the market collapses and the bailouts of the big businesses and banks, you may have noticed that when businesses fail, they get massive bailouts from the government. And we need to be worried that there is a reifying of class divisions going on here. And we need to fight against that. The author is convinced that we can do that via philosophy. Let's take a look at what he says in this very last sentence. Or two. Perhaps our greatest asset is ultimately not a building, an artifact, or even an economic system, but rather our humanity and our feeling of interconnection. In the final analysis, that is why we need to constantly remind ourselves to infuse business with ethics. Nice. What a fantastic last sentence. So the author, again, is very convinced that our hope lies in trying to infuse business with ethics. It seems that he is of the opinion that we can build that into businesses, both from the ground up and from the top down. So pressure from the consumer organizations, help from the government, although it doesn't seem to be doing that very often these days. And we can make business work for us and preserve humanity. And we certainly hope that is the case, especially as we face financial disasters and epidemics. like we've never faced before. Now, that's the author's case. I wonder what you think. Do you think that that's enough, that we start teaching business ethics to people, that we start requiring businesses to write those into their charters, that we how much progress can be made? How long have we been engaged in that sort of project? Do we have time with the way these financial crises are occurring? Do we have time to just teach consumers how to be better consumers, to try to teach employees to be more aware employees, and to teach businesses to take the stakeholder view instead of the shareholder view? I guess time will tell, but I'm interested to hear what you have to say about that. But anyways, now we get to our quiz questions. So quiz question 1, true or false? The only causes of the failures of major corporations like Enron are the moral failings of individuals. And quiz question number 2. What does the author propose as a corrective to the corrupting influence of capitalism? This is the author. What does the author propose? A, focusing on enduring values and systematic moral thought. B, the immediate violent overthrow of capitalism. Or C, consistent progress to democratic control of business, i.e. socialism. What does the author propose as a corrective to capitalism? All right. Thanks for sticking these lectures out to the very end. I know it's been difficult circumstances if you're watching these lectures in the spring of 2020. So thank you for watching them and for your participation on the discussion boards. Have been a joy to read. I wish I had time to make more of them and hear more of your thoughts, but I look forward to hearing your thoughts in your papers. And I look forward to seeing how you bring together the talk of business ethics, the talk of the focus on enduring values with the innovations that you wrote about in your first paper. I'm really looking forward to that. So thanks again for sticking it out. Thanks for your thoughts on the topic, and I look forward to hearing more for you. Hopefully I'll see you around campus sometime, and look forward to feedback on your papers.